It wasn't long ago that world leaders sat at the negotiating table and signed a pact to phase down coal, achieve net zero emissions, and quit subsidizing fossil fuel industries to help slow down the pace of climate change. But now that Russia, the third largest producer of oil and second largest producer of natural gas, invaded Ukraine, supply chains of these fossil fuels are in flux. Last week, President Biden announced a complete ban on importing gas, oil, and coal from Russia. The UK is set to phase out Russian oil by the end of the year, and the European Union has proposed measures which it claims will end its reliance on Russian fossil fuels well before 2030. The crisis is prompting many to say that this is another reason why the world should shift to renewable energy sources. The most recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, which came out just as Russia's invasion began, said that if we don't cut emissions now, the window to adapt to climate change will only get smaller and more difficult. So, how is the current crisis in energy impacting the world's plans to transition from fossil fuels? And how will an energy transition affect the world order? This video seeks to answer those questions. I'm Simrin Sirur, and you're watching Tipping Point. If there's anything we can gauge from the Western world's reaction to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, it is that fossil fuels, namely oil and gas, still decide much of the political world order. The proposals and sanctions to cut off Russian fuel supply are meant to hurt the country's economy in the hope that it will stop Putin's war machine. But it doesn't mean the end of fossil fuels. The International Energy Agency's latest analysis shows that after a drop during the 2020 pandemic year, carbon dioxide emissions reached the highest ever annual level in 2021 as the world went back to work. Now, the US says that the only way to eliminate any producing country's ability to use oil as an economic weapon would be to, quote, reduce our dependency on oil. But the US says this as one of the highest income countries that is also the world's largest oil producer, producing 16.5 million barrels a day. The EU is in a more precarious position, with 40% of its gas imports, that's 155 billion cubic meters of gas, coming from Russia. To support its plans to move away from Russian resources, the EU will be sourcing its supply from alternative countries like Qatar, the US, and parts of Africa. I spoke to Kartik Ganesan, fellow and research director at the Council for Energy, Environment and Water, who said that this may not spell good news for all of us in South Asia.
Right, they'll phase out their dependence on Russian, crude and oil, and less on gas, I think, on crude. So, which means that if 7 to 8% of global supply, right, is kind of being frowned upon, right? Because for whatever reasons, I mean, we don't know how long it's going to happen. It is going to result in poorer countries like India, right, and the rest of the developing world not having access to as much resources as they would need, right? And in the ideal case, right, given that the West consumes so much of the globe's crude, they should look at literally kind of figuring out how can I overnight contract my demand. Those are these are behavior changes, and and which means that the crude oil demand or nat gas demand in the short run is, as they call it, going to be inelastic, because systems that actually consume them are going to take some time to respond to this shock. And if that is the case, obviously that the West is better placed to pay for crude oil at whatever price it comes at, and as a result it will take away supply that we desperately need, right? And as we know, India depends on overseas imports, and this has happened. It's now slowly risen, right, from 80% to now about close to 85% of our crude oil requirement is imported, right? In addition to importing certain things like, for instance, LPG, right? Because we don't produce enough LPG from our sort of refineries, so LPG is imported. So and LPG is also going to go up, right? So that's the shock that India is sort of going to see.
India's petrol and diesel prices have not changed since November 4th, mostly because of the assembly elections that took place in 5 states. Prices are expected to rise now that they've come to an end, and when they do, those who depend on petrol and diesel for their livelihoods are likely to be badly affected. This energy crisis has suddenly put an emphasis on energy security, which is basically reliable, affordable access to all fuels and energy sources. An article written by energy experts Jason Bordorf and Megan O'Sullivan in Foreign Affairs magazine had predicted the difficulties in transitioning to clean energy sources, especially if energy security is threatened as it is today. Climate change leadership, they said, should include a lot more than just setting climate goals at a negotiating table. It also means lowering, in a variety of ways, the economic and geopolitical risks posed by even a successful transition to clean energy, they said. I also spoke to Lydia Powell, a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, who decoded what this means. I asked her whether the current energy crisis can propel the world to cleaner energy sources faster, and this is what she said.
I don't agree with that expectation because much of the uh, production of technologies for renewable energy, solar panels, wind turbines, depend a lot on fossil fuels for production, for mining minerals and so on, for solar panel production, and also for wind turbine production. And when the price of oil increases, the economics of these projects will be affected. And accelerating towards renewable energy will actually slow down, is what I think. Another thing is, I personally feel that countries will start prioritizing energy security and economic security more than environmental security, because ultimately these two are very, very important. It affects day-to-day life. I personally feel that this crisis will bring to the fore energy security and economic security, and countries are likely to implement policies that assist in economic security and energy security. I feel that these will take priority over environmental security.
So, what does this mean for renewable energy? The writers in the Foreign Affairs article give us a clue. They write, new technologies can solve technical and logistical problems but cannot eliminate competition, power differentials, or the incentive that all countries have to protect their interests and maximize their influence. If governments do not recognize this, the world will confront some jarring discontinuities in the years ahead, including new economic and security threats that will reconfigure global politics. But perhaps the greatest risk of failing to identify and plan for these pitfalls is that if national security concerns come into conflict with climate change ambitions, a successful transition might not take place at all. Despite the Russian invasion, plans to transition to cleaner energy and achieve net zero haven't been sidelined. The world will expand its share of renewable energy, even if it takes a little longer. And when it does, what could a new world order look like?
So I feel that the geopolitics of the renewable era will probably resemble the fossil fuel era, but the players will be different. The renewable energy world will be a very material intensive world, maybe not oil and gas, but minerals, metals and minerals. So I feel the geopolitics will shift towards countries that have these minerals and countries which don't. And some countries which supply the supply chains of control the supply chains of these metals and minerals, and it might play out very similar to the fossil fuel era, when the countries which had fossil fuel resources had an advantage. In the renewable energy era, the countries which control the production, the resources, and the production and supply of these minerals will gain significance. Already it's quite evident. China has, in certain parts of the mineral value chain that are essential for renewable energy, China is very prominent, and that is already threatening the renewable energy plans of many countries, including India.
Thank you so much for watching. This is Simrin Sirur for ThePrint. Do subscribe to ThePrint.in and follow us on social media.